Hello! Welcome to Cloud Native Live, where we dive into the code behind Cloud Native. I'm your host today. My name is Whitney Lee, and I'm a CNCF ambassador. So every week, we bring a new set of presenters to showcase how to work with Cloud Native technologies. We'll build things, we'll break things, and we'll answer your questions. This session is going to be focused on answering questions. But this week, we have friends Arko Dasgupta and Erica Huberg here with us to talk to us about Envoy Gateway 1.1. So this is a whole Q&A session. So now this is an official live stream of the CNCF, and as such, it's subject to the CNCF Code of Conduct. So please be respectful of all your fellow participants and presenters. And those of you who are joining us live, please say hello in the chat and where you're tuning in from. I'm here from Austin, Texas. And as always, if you have questions during the presentation, please put them in the chat. Please be liberal with your questions today. And with all of that, I'm going to hand it over to Erica. Erica, take it away, please.
Hi, thank you, Whitney, and hello, everybody who's joining the live stream. And yeah, please say hi where you are. My name is Erica Huberg, as Whitney said. I am in the Atlanta metropolitan area in Georgia. So I'm on the Eastern time zone here in the US, and I'm here with Arko Dasgupta, who is an Envoy Gateway maintainer. And he is sitting on the other side of the continent in the San Francisco Bay Area. So he's in Pacific time zone over there. So maybe there's some other people from the Bay Area. Yeah, some more people from the Pacific time zone over there. Hello. And as I said, please feel free to ask questions in here. I'm going to start with a couple of really quick introductions to know a bit more about who Erica and Arko are. So my name is Erica Huberg. I'm a technical product manager as well as a community advocate and educator. So I spend a lot of time with Arko related to Envoy and helping the community learn about and adopt Envoy and Envoy Gateway. And I said, Arko is a Envoy Gateway maintainer, and we're going to ask him some hard and interesting questions today. So it's going to be really exciting. Is Arko looking nervous yet? No, he is not, because he knows about Envoy Gateway. And as Whitney said, the focus of this session is Envoy Gateway 1.1. And to ease Arko into it, I'm going to start with some easy questions that he should know the answer to as an Envoy Gateway maintainer. So the very first question, Arko, what on earth is Envoy Gateway? And how is it different from Envoy Proxy itself? So we know that Envoy Gateway, Envoy Proxy are part of this Envoy project. But what is Envoy Gateway, Arko? Please help us.
Yeah. Hi, Erica. Hi, Whitney and Erica. Thanks for hosting this webinar. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everybody. I see many people have joined from different parts of the world. Let's get started with your question. And so what is Envoy? Let's start with Envoy Proxy. So Envoy Proxy is a software server that acts as a traffic cop for other web servers. And what this means is it can control traffic that can go through it, and it can route traffic, and it can route this traffic to sort of different backends and web servers. Envoy Gateway is another software that manages Envoy Proxy. And it essentially does two things. One is it presents a simplified networking and security API that platform engineers and application engineers can configure their traffic in. And it translates this API into XDS, which is Envoy-specific configuration, and programs that via gRPC. The other thing it does is it creates and manages this entire Envoy proxy fleet infrastructure. So the industry term for this is control plane. So Envoy Gateway is a control plane that manages Envoy proxy, and Envoy proxy is a data plane and through which traffic flows to go to specific web servers.
So in a way, Envoy Gateway makes it a lot easier to use Envoy Proxy, because I have tried to use Envoy Proxy in the past, and to be fair, that API can be a little bit confusing and hard to manage. So if I'm using Envoy Gateway to configure and use Envoy Proxy to handle my traffic that is coming in, I can't use it really everywhere, can I? It is really helping me in Kubernetes, most specifically, I believe, Argo. So how does Envoy Gateway fit into your typical Kubernetes cloud native environment?
Yeah. So Envoy Gateway, the API that I spoke about that it presents is the Gateway API, which is part of the Kubernetes project. It's a successor to the Ingress API, which is focused on managing layer 4 and layer 7 traffic entering your cluster. We have all these application software engineers building software and web servers that are instantiated as deployments and services in Kubernetes. These servers process client requests, and we need a way for these client requests to enter the cluster. This is called Ingress or Ingress Controller, and Envoy Gateway acts as an Ingress controller for traffic entering Kubernetes clusters.
Yeah, because if I built some really cool apps that are running and services that run on Kubernetes, it'd be a shame if I never got traffic to actually get to my software. And obviously, are a lot of different ways and options of doing this, but Envoy Gateway really helps you leverage the different features of Envoy Proxy in an easy way. Just to take a moment here, because you made a reference to something that I remember when I learned about it for the first time, but want to make sure we get everyone along for the ride. Could you just give a really quick explanation of the difference between L4 traffic handling and L7 traffic handling?
Yeah, and so in layer 4 traffic handling, you would route based on sort of your 4 tuples, your source IP, dest IP, source port, destination port. And you would usually based on the port, you would route to specific backends. In layer 7 routing, you would route based on sort of the attributes within the HTTP headers. And so you peek into the header, you may sort of transform it, and then based on that, you may route to a specific backend based on the header information.
So would you say it would be true that things like observability gets easier with L7 traffic handling? Are there any benefits like that? Or is it equally easy either way?
That's a good question. And so based on specific HTTP attributes, you can get enhanced telemetry. Now that you have access to HTTP requests, you can do some better load balancing. You can do load balancing at the request level rather than the connection level. And you can better distribute load. So, yeah.
Thank you, Arko. Since we are still in the introduction phase, we actually have a question from the audience that I think fits into this introduction phase before we jump into what's actually exciting about 1.1. And the question is coming from YouTube, and I'm going to read the question out loud so we can all hear it. So how is it, Envoy Gateway, different from Istio Ingress Gateway? Is there an advantage in using Envoy Gateway instead of the Istio Ingress Gateway?
Yeah, great question. So Istio is a platform that provides ingress as well as a service mesh feature. And so the ingress gateway here is the ingress feature that Istio provides. So Envoy Gateway also provides ingress. There may be features in Envoy Gateway, such as rate limiting and OIDC, that you'd want to leverage that are not first-class features in Istio. And so for that, for those use cases, you may want to run Envoy Gateway's Envoy as the ingress, and also run it beside Istio, where you can use Istio for east-west traffic, and you can use Envoy Gateway's Envoy for north-south traffic.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point, Argo, especially around the rate limiting, because for me, especially configuring rate limiting with Envoy Gateway was like a couple of lines of configuration, and the amount of configuration and deployment you got to do to make rate limiting in that fashion work for the Istio Ingress Gateway is a little bit more complex, especially if you want to have different rate limits on different routes or other criteria based on maybe even application end user IDs as the traffic is coming in from the outside. I find like very few lines of configuration with Envoy Gateway to make that happen. When I looked at how to configure that with Istio, possible, but a lot more lines of configuration. Really makes that more accessible. Probably my favorite feature. No, I said so many features that are my favorites, so I'm not going to play favorites with features. They're all wonderful part of the family. So before we jump into the one, we have another question. Let me just check that very quickly. Okay, I will get back to that. We have a question from YouTube. I'll get back to that a bit later. So I'm going to round up our introduction questions before we jump into Wonder One specifically. And I'm going to round it up with the question of Arco. So you said earlier that Envoy Gateway implements the Gateway API in Kubernetes. And what are some notable extensions to that API that you would like to highlight or share with the audience here before we move on? I guess in one way you can say the ability to do rate limiting in a sense. But yeah, what are some notable extensions and how does that play in when you use Envoy Gateway?
That's a great question. And so the Gateway API has provided some features such and specific APIs like HTTP route, and exposed the ability to sort of route on headers, modify headers, etc. But there are many other use cases that users need when sort of designing their ingress. And so Envoy Gateway has gone ahead and added extensions into the Gateway API, and these are new APIs such as security policy, backend traffic policy, client traffic policy, to be able to configure and fine-tune some other knobs such as retries, timeouts, rate limiting, and other connection level parameters that are not yet exposed in the Gateway API.
Thank you, Arco. And as I'm transitioning into the Envoy Gateway Wonder One, we get a bit deeper into it. I'm actually going to bring up Ike's question here. Hopefully I'm pronouncing that. We have a question from YouTube. And the question is, can you explain the lack of resources on YouTube on Envoy Gateway 1.1? Just a few. I assume that means there's only a few on there. I'm going to take that question because I am probably the reason there is not a ton of it. I spend a lot of time in my role and my free time creating content around Envoy Gateway, and I am getting more and more comfortable being on video. So I'm happy to get more content out there on YouTube on 1.1 to make sure that we have that available and easy to access. So that hopefully that answer is somewhat satisfying. But if you want me to make more videos, help provide more content on YouTube, please let me know. Would be super happy to do so. And I'm going to jump in now to more Wonder One questions because a lot of things did change between 1.0 and 1.1. And how long was the time period? So to bring the audience up to speed is back in March, Envoy Gateway became GA, generally available, and 1.0 was released. It was very exciting. And it wasn't that it just suddenly popped out of nowhere. It had actually been worked on for about 2 years before it became GA. And Envoy Proxy itself is not new. So Envoy Proxy has been around for a really long time. As you'll have seen in questions, Envoy Proxy is the proxy sidecar of the Istio service mesh. And Istio is, 7 years old. So as you can imagine, the data plane Envoy Proxy, not a new kid on the block. But we have now this, for the first time, having a control plane that is part of the CNCF Envoy project and not a separate project or a proprietary vendor solution. That's pretty exciting. And the time between 1.0 and 1.1 was about 3 months. And a lot of exciting things happened. A lot of people contributed to new features. And I want to start with a question. Arco, what are the most significant features that were introduced in 1.1 and that you'd like to highlight to the audience? And maybe they should check them out.
Yeah, we can probably spend hours talking about all the features that were added in the 3 months between 1.0 and 1.1, but I'll try and just cover a few. I first want to thank all the contributors who've added all these cool features into 1.1. and the users who took 1.0 for a spin gave us feedback, and that's something sort of iterated on and added into 1.1. So there are different sort of buckets of features we've added. Let's start with with traffic. And so we added the ability to add support for filters at the backend ref level. This allows you to do things like add specific headers for after the routing decision has been made for a specific backend. We've added support for cookie-based consistent hashing or load balancing, which is also referred to as soft session affinity. And we did this using the extension, which is the backend traffic policy. We added a new API called the backend API, which lets you actually route to endpoints that are external to Kubernetes. And so now you can route to an external endpoint and define it as a static IP, as an FQDN, or even route to a Unix domain socket.
Well, you see, I'm actually really excited about this backend API that was introduced, this resource, the backend, because now I can have Envoy Gateway in my Kubernetes cluster, and I can route traffic both to services inside in Kubernetes, but also outside of Kubernetes. I think that is the reality for many people, that not all of their services are running on Kubernetes. And for many people, they have things running on VMs, for example. They need to route traffic to both. And sometimes using a Kubernetes ingress or gateway solution can feel limiting, that you are only able to get traffic to Kubernetes hosted services. So I'm really excited about that. However, Arco, we did touch on Istio earlier in this conversation. And so if I am in the situation that I have a Kubernetes cluster and I have services that are part of a mesh like Istio or Linkerd, and I have services running outside of Kubernetes, are you saying that I can just route to all of these services with Envoy Gateway? And is it hard?
Yeah, so in 1.1, Envoy Gateway added a feature to where users can now specify a routing type. By default, Envoy Gateway selects endpoints using the, and learns about service endpoints and pod endpoints using the endpoint slice API. We've also added the ability to route directly to a cluster IP or a VIP. This makes it easier for a sidecar, it could be a Linkerd sidecar or an Istio sidecar, to intercept the traffic, making it easier to integrate into a service mesh.
Well, that's really good. So it doesn't feel like you have to make an either-or decision. Like you can use your service mesh together with Envoy Gateway, leverage features like the rate limiting and other features that you can go on the gateway, as well as having those features for when you're routing traffic to things outside of Kubernetes. Because, yeah, I definitely have had services running in more than one place. And as we are adding all of these different types of targets that you can route traffic upstream to, I have a question though. We also have probably a lot of wide variety of clients calling from outside of the Kubernetes cluster. We can have stuff coming from over the internet, maybe even mobile phones. And then we have internal systems that might be outside of the Kubernetes cluster and calling in. With all of this variety of both clients and backends, has that become easier with Envoy Gateway 1.1 than it was in 1.0 in any way? Did you make any improvements there?
Yeah, to address all the heterogeneous clients, the infrastructure that we're dealing with, Envoy Gateway added more knobs to sort of tweak connection level settings, like the connection buffer limit, the HTTP idle timeout, specific HTTP2 settings like max concurrent streams. And so you can tweak all these different settings and these connection level parameters for your use case.
Thank you, Arco. I think we have a really interesting question related to this traffic handling topic that's come in on YouTube from Marco. And the question is the following. How does Envoy Gateway 1.1 handle high availability and fault tolerance in a multi-cluster environment? Can you do that? Is that possible, Arco? Or is this outside of what it's currently capable of?
So now the focus for these releases is a single cluster. And within a single cluster, at the Envoy gateway control plane level, we enable leader election in 1.1. So that improves high availability and fault tolerance. At the Envoy proxy, the data plane layer, we have first-class support for HPA, setting replicas, and also configuring pod disruption budget for Envoy gateway and Envoy proxy. And so that's how you could achieve HA. You could do the same thing using you could deploy multiple Envoy gateways in multi-cluster and create the setup yourself. In the next release, v1.2, we are looking to add support for routing in an active passive way, and so that should sort of help with the multi-cluster use case.
Yeah, and I think another aspect that we have seen with some of the adopters of Envoy Gateway is an interesting architecture in multi-cluster setup. So it's a little bit, I had never seen this setup, by the way, so bear with me for a second. And it's very exciting. So people have seen, some adopters of Envoy Gateway create a edge platform cluster. And in that cluster, they are not running business logic workloads. They are running Envoy gateways, authorization services that plug into the gateway solution. And they have that edge platform cluster sort of above all of their other clusters that then have Envoy gateways handling traffic coming into them. So if you have been around for a bit, because I might look young, but I'm a little bit older than maybe I look, I hope. Anyway, I've been around for a while. And if you remember the DMZ, depending on where you are in the world, type architectures, where you had traffic coming in, looking at it and deciding where to get it over to, might seem familiar to you. And so I've seen that happen. Arko, would you say that that is one strategy to deal with multi-cluster traffic handling and failovers, et cetera, and high availability?
Yeah, and this need arises because different teams have different requirements and they manage different software. So you may have the platform team managing Envoy Gateway and Envoy Proxy in one cluster, and this is called sort of the tier 1 cluster. And then they may route to backends that are actually other Envoy gateways and proxies in different clusters, and those are managed by separate sort of business units and teams who want more control. And so, yeah, we see this architecture deployed very often in the real world.
Yeah, and if you're in the audience and this is something you're like interested in, I'm just going to let you know that over the next couple of weeks, I am going to write down a little bit on this platform cluster type architecture to enable other people who want to get into production to adopt this type of architecture pattern. And I'll be contributing that to the Envoy documentation site, so we can have a little bit of common architecture patterns and approaches in the documentation there. So you can check that out, but you can obviously follow me on LinkedIn, and I'll post when that documentation is available for you to check out. And maybe, back to an earlier question, maybe I'll do a video and post on YouTube. So maybe I can spend more time on YouTube. Okay, we have more questions, Arko. So I am going to pick some questions from the chat, if that's all right with you. I know we have questions that were submitted beforehand as well, so I'm really happy with all the questions that we are getting. Thank you so much, everyone, for engaging and being part of the conversation. And one question from Jack on YouTube is, I have been using Envoy with Conquer for ingress. I assume Contour, I guess. Maybe that's a typo. I was like, I haven't heard of that one. I assume that's a Contour typo or autocorrect maybe. In the long run, the question continues, in the long run, should I retire this and switch to Envoy Gateway? Or should we envision gateways and ingresses coexisting? Arko, what are your thoughts? What would you recommend someone to do if they are currently using Contour?
Yeah, so running software, learning about software is non-trivial. So if you, Contour is another ingress controller like Envoy Gateway. Actually, the maintainers of Contour and Emissary got together to help build Envoy Gateway. So a lot of the features you see in Envoy Gateway can be attributed to the maintainers from Contour. So going back to the question, if, like I said, running software, learning about software is not free. If you are happy with what you're using, you should definitely stick to it. Envoy Gateway does provide a lot more features, like rate limiting. It allows you to sort of add customization and extensions, such as using xproc to extend sort of and custom logic to be able to configure WASM modules to be able to run WASM modules in Envoy, and also directly configure anything that's not available in the first class API, but's available in Envoy using like the Envoy patch policy and extension manager. And so if you do sort of hit this limit with Contour, I would definitely suggest trying out Envoy Gateway to get more out of Envoy.
And I think another, so to add on to your answer, Arco, I think something, as you mentioned at the very beginning of your answer, people who were working on Contour, people who worked on Emissary, and other people from other companies did come together to design some of those features for Envoy Gateway. And Contour is ultimately another control plane to control and manage Envoy proxies in your Kubernetes environment. And you could use either. I hope that by having a first-class Envoy project control plane, we will be able to drive both the proxy and the control plane, so the data plane and the control plane projects together, and really make it super easy for people to get the most out of Envoy proxy. Arco, we have a question. I just want to make sure, because if someone is asking this, I want to make sure we catch everyone up. And we have a question from Joseph on YouTube. And Joseph is asking the following. Stupid question. What is Envoy and Contour? Joseph, one moment though, there are no stupid questions. Thank you for asking, because if you are asking, there's probably someone else on this live stream who's also wondering. So Arco, how would you explain that? And hopefully maybe some of the answers we've given just now also helps provide color.
Yeah, so Envoy historically has referred to Envoy proxy, which is the data plane and sort of which is a reverse and forward proxy, and traffic flows through it. Envoy Gateway is another project within sort of the Envoy ecosystem that is a control plane to manage Envoy proxies. Contour is another control plane that also manages and configures Envoy proxy. A lot of Envoy.
Does that help? Yeah. Hopefully, Joseph, that helps. And for anyone else that's also on the live stream, please comment if you have follow-up questions on that, or let us know if that was a helpful answer. I am going to go back a little bit in the questions, because we have a question from earlier that I did skip over, but I feel that it is related to the topic we are just talking about right now, that is about different ingress and gateway solutions. So we have a question from YouTube earlier, and that's a follow-up question that was asking, how would you compare Envoy Gateway with Nginx ingress?
Yeah, so Envoy Gateway is a control plane that's based on Envoy proxy being the data plane. Ingress Nginx is a control plane that is based on the Nginx proxy. So I think this is one differentiation. The other is Ingress Nginx is based on the Ingress API, which is sort of the predecessor to the Gateway API. And Envoy Gateway is based on the Gateway API, which is successor to the Ingress API. It provides first-class support for more features and more protocols.
Thank you, Arco. I think another thing that I often look at as I've looked at different solutions and what to pick for what, Nginx has its strengths where it is good for certain use cases. I've definitely used Nginx a lot for website distribution, so like especially serving static assets, and Envoy proxy and by sort of extension using Envoy Gateway, is a really good control and data plane for managing service traffic. And I just want to let people know that if you have a Kubernetes cluster, you don't have to choose just one gateway API implementation or just one ingress solution. You can actually have multiple, if you're in the gateway space, have multiple gateway classes in the same cluster and have different things. You don't have to, it's not you pick one thing and that's the only thing you can now use for forever and ever. Use the right tool for the right use case. Don't feel that, oh, I have to find one that can do everything I ever want, right? Yeah, hopefully, I hope that's a little bit helpful for people. I have actually written some articles in the past on different solutions and their strengths and when they are really great for you to use. Arko, was there anything I said that you would say was incorrect or wrong, maybe?
Big +1. Yeah, everything said.
Okay, I feel like maybe I will get more on YouTube after this, now when we're increasing my confidence of live speaking. So we have a couple more questions coming in the channel, but I am just want to move on a little because there are some really cool one-to-one features that I think the audience would really want to hear about, Arko. And for reference for the audience, I spent a lot of time looking through both the release notes and the pull requests that went into one-to-one. And to be honest, half the time I was very confused and I was like, Arko, what on earth is going on here? Why do I even care? That was a lot of my experience. But Arko did answer, and this is also the reason why I really wanted to get Arko on this live stream, so that we could all ask him those questions and not just me huddling on him on Slack in unusual times of the day. The next part that I wanted to look at a little bit here is that I happen to love security. And security is one of my favorite topics when it comes to traffic handling overall. And there are some exciting features that come in between 1.0 and 1.1. What are some features people should be checking out, Arko, as part of this latest release?
Yeah, so we've added the ability to allow deny specific IP subnets. This improves access control. There's also the ability, we also added the ability to perform mutual TLS or MTLS from the gateway to the specific backends. You can also tweak different TLS settings, such as ciphers, when talking TLS to the backend. We also we added support for optional MTLS for traffic between external clients to the gateway. I think this is super useful because it allows you to support cases where you can do MTLS and simple TLS on the same listener for different host names. You can gradually migrate clients off from simple TLS to mutual TLS.
Yeah, like for me, I remember like looking at that PR and that part of the release notes, especially around the optional flag or around client certificates. So to be able to get client certificate validation and MTLS, I was like, why? I remember like asking you, I was like, why on earth are we doing this? This seems like an odd feature. But then when I understood what it helped me to do, I was like, actually, this is really exciting. So once in my life, more than once actually, I had to try and migrate off basic auth. So having like clients calling in and they identify themselves with basic auth. And then, yeah, we got to, as technology moved on, like try to make that a bit better, but trying to switch it all over to MTLS in one go can be very high effort coordination task. So for me, like little thing, but it really would have saved me time in some of the past experiences. And maybe you could even consider combining basic auth and MTLS or other authorization pieces such as tokens to have MTLS for client identity, but like the client calling and having access tokens to also inform of more authorization levels. We have a couple of questions in the chat, Arko, and I'm a little bit worried here that I will pronounce some names wrong. But we have a question from YouTube from Teju, And the question is, apologies if I really messed up the pronunciation of that name, but the question is this: are Envoy Gateway CRDs like client traffic policy and backend traffic policy as stable and standard as Gateway API CRDs? Do we need to worry about breaking changes to these CRDs? Arco, what is the state of this?
Yeah, so the current API versions for a lot of these extensions are V1 Alpha 1, so they're not V1 yet. But I want to say that us maintainers in the community spend a lot of time worrying and making sure that we do not add any breaking changes even to these V1 Alpha 1 APIs. I think that we spend a lot of our time making sure that we find an alternative way to not add any breaking changes. And so they are V1 Alpha 1, but yeah, we try our best to make sure that there are no breaking changes.
And maybe the more adopters there are and the more users there are, it's really going to help accelerate and drive stability and finalization of some of these. Would that be a fair thing to say, Arco?
Yeah. And I'm hoping that
Hopefully.
we reach V1 for these APIs in the coming releases.
Yeah, like they're really powerful CIDs and resources, right? The client traffic policy and the backend traffic policy. I'm really excited about the features that it brings to users to easily configure and use. We do have another question from YouTube, and it's a bit more of a discussion question, but I'd like to bring it up to our attention, Arco. And the question is from Hani, hopefully, again, not messing up the pronunciations here. But the question is like this: from an architect point of view, if two things are almost doing the same thing, we tend to choose the one which is more comprehensive to avoid duplication and make sure it is highly available. What do you think? And so that's the question. And I'm going to start the answer and then hand it over to see what Arco got to think about it. First of all, honey, totally agree. I've definitely been in that situation. Like, good enough. Like, I've been running and managing platform teams in my career, and having too many snowflake solutions in the system can be super stressful. And you don't want to have like 5 different versions of the same, like of different components that can do the same thing. It also gets really hard to maintain, manage, upgrade all of those, right? So totally agree with you. I do think finding that solution that fits 80% of use cases and have another alternative solution for specific edge cases is sometimes useful. But definitely, I have been often championing and trying to have that single good enough solution for our use cases. Arco, what has your experience been in sort of platform and infrastructure engineering and making these choices?
Yeah, so operating software and debugging issues has a cost. And so, like you said, I would definitely tend to choose an implementation that's easier to operate, that's highly available, and easier to diagnose. So we're paged less often when traffic issues happen, right? And it reduces sort of the MTTR.
And actually, on that topic of being paged with an issue, I am going to jump a little bit because we have a question from that was submitted earlier before this session, and that is about some of the observability and operational features that were added into 1.1. So, Arco, I know that there's a really, really neat little feature in 1.1 that helps you when you get paged at 2 a.m. in the morning. Can you tell us a little bit more about that feature? I think you know exactly which one I'm talking about. Okay, so
yeah, I think you're talking about the metadata feature, and so
yes.
We added the ability to map input attributes to your output XTS config. Envoy Gateway translates a Gateway API into XTS config, and so now you can actually better understand how input resources map to output resources. If you do annotate your input resources using annotations, those get mapped to your output resources too. This way, you can also enrich telemetry. So let's say you are part of Team X, you could add an annotation in your route resource. And then when you're sort of accessing your access logs, you can retrieve this as a metadata. So now you can actually link team ownership to a specific traffic. So as a platform engineer who's kind of going through and parsing all these access logs, I can know exactly what issue exists and which team this sort of traffic belongs.
Which team we should actually be waking up at 2 a.m. in the morning, right?
Yeah.
I don't know, we probably have a few platform engineers on this call. I have personally managed a few like API gateways in my career over the last 7 years, and the amount of times that I've had to pick up an alert because that is some underlying services breaking. The gateway's fine. The gateway's doing great. Routing the traffic, it's just underlying services 500 sending 500 responses. So it's such a small little neat feature, but being able to tag the different routes and even other resources to specific ownership so that I can get to the right person to help resolve the issue quickly is such a nice little thing. And on observability in general, Arco, there are a couple of other exciting features that have been added, and one of them helps you reduce some cloud logging spend. And I think I've spent enough money on log storage in my life.
Yeah, so now we've added support for cell filters for access logs. And so now you can cherry pick exactly what logs you want to log based on specific traffic attributes. And using that, you can kind of reduce your cloud storage bill.
I was going to say, anyone who's still tuning into this live, I can't see exactly how many people are watching, but if you're watching and you have had any challenges in your life when it comes to troubleshooting, tracing, handling a production issue situation, please feel free to add your comments or even just share your experiences with the other people who are on here with us. I'm sure we've all been in those both stressful and complicated situations trying to get to the bottom of what's going on. What are some other features, Arco, that you would say people should be checking out in terms of observability or even operability of Envoy Gateway?
Yeah, so we've added a new Helm chart called Gateway Add-ons Helm. We've bundled all the telemetry components like Prometheus and Grafana, including the dashboards, into one Helm chart. And we've provided those just to simplify and ease out the day-to operations. From an operational perspective, you can now configure the Envoy proxy resource, which is CRD, which kind of manages the Envoy proxy fleet infrastructure. And you can link it directly to the gateway resource using the new infrastructure.parameters ref field. And you no longer need to link it to a gateway class. So you can kind of fine tune infrastructure at a per gateway level rather than gateway class level. We've also added a lot more knobs in the Envoy Gateway Helm chart.
Which, by the way, if there's anyone tuning in from the UK, sounds incredibly funny what Arco just said. I'll just leave it at that. But yeah, you've introduced some configurations.
Yeah.
Yeah, you could continue. What kind of configurations have you included, Arco?
So we've added configurations to support the air-gapped cases to make it easier to sort of pull from a private image registry. This is also very common in enterprise environments.
Yeah, definitely been there. But the only place I could get images from is from a private image registry, and to even get the images into that registry had to go through a ton of security scanning and validation before I was even allowed to use it. So making it easier to deploy this with Envoy Gateway simplifies anyone who's operating in that kind of enterprise environment. Then you were mentioning earlier, like as we were talking through this observability and operation part, that you also make it easier to deploy Grafana and Prometheus. And I think it's kind of, if you haven't deployed it yourself before, like the ease of just getting it into your cluster to be able to at least start trying things out and see how it all hangs together is super helpful. I know obviously as you're moving up and maturing your adoption of Envoy Gateway, you probably already have your Prometheus installed in your clusters and you have Grafana already, but this can really help you get going and get an understanding of how to use it and how it all integrates together. And we have some questions from before, Arco. I know that there's so much, and as you said earlier, we could spend more than an hour talking about Envoy Gateway and what changed from 1.0 to 1.1, and there is way more that we haven't talked about. But please, again, audience, feel free to drop questions. I wanted to get at least one of the questions that we had received ahead of this event from. Let's see, which one should you pick? I have so many here. Okay, I will jump into this one. This is an interesting one. Okay, let me read this for you. Give me a reason to convince my boss to migrate to using Envoy Gateway. In this question, we have no context of what they are using previously, so you might have to do some assumptions here, Argo. But what advice or would you give to someone in that situation without knowing what they're previously using? And what reason would you give to convince the boss to migrate?
Yeah, so reason one, it uses Envoy proxy as a data plane proxy, which is cloud native, highly performant, and feature rich. Envoy Gateway provides many ways to extend the API. It extends the gateway API using all these policies that we spoke about. It also introduces other APIs like the Envoy extension policy, where you could configure a WASM module or an XProc service. And so it provides many ways to extend features that are in Envoy proxy, Envoy Gateway, for all those custom logic use cases.
That's like, oh, sorry, yeah, go ahead. I was going to jam a bit that on the extensibility, because the XProc configuration available, being able to configure that with the Envoy Gateway control plane, that was new in 1.1. Before we only had XAuth in 1.0, and being able to utilize XProc is super cool. And that backend resource, the new backend API that was introduced, I think if I remember correctly, you can actually extend Envoy proxy your data plane, calling an external process over Unix domain sockets. So it improves the latency and the performance of integrating your extension. Is that correct, Argo?
Yeah, that's true. And so you can now extend your functionality using an external processing server. We've seen in many deployments, users kind of configure this server as a sidecar to the Envoy proxy, and then they tend to connect Envoy using a Unix domain socket, keeps things close, makes things fast.
So if your boss is really concerned about customizing thing, that particular point helps. Is there any other big hero points that you would recommend someone to bring up to their boss or lead architect as they are adding Envoy Gateway as an option on the table?
Yeah, it's a CNCF open source project maintained by a community belonging to various different organizations. So there's no vendor lock-in. I said it's open source, but it also provides first-class support for many features like rate limiting and OIDC that have historically been behind a paywall. So it's all open source for you to consume.
Yeah, that is actually a really exciting point that towards the end, Arco. I think as a community, we are really bringing some of those necessary features when you're building apps into this multi-company CNCF open source project, and having this control plane be part as a companion to the proxy data plane in the Envoy project. They're part of the family, they're little family, they're together, they're partners, and it is part of the same project.
Yeah, I think all of these features are already available in Envoy proxy. Envoy Gateway is just making it increasing the adoption of Envoy.
Make it easier.
Yeah.
so much easier. And I just like the little thing that using Envoy Gateway to manage Envoy proxy in Kubernetes, you don't even have to like think much about how you configure your data plane to scale. Obviously, you can fine tune those configurations, but to get started, it makes it so much easier. I'm going to weave a question from the chat in here as well before we move on to other questions that were submitted ahead of time. So we have a question from YouTube from Laszlo, and the question is this. You mentioned Team X annotated logs solutions works with metrics and traces too. So is it possible to separate those types of telemetry to easily match to teams in a multi-tenant environment? What do you think, Argo? Does this make it easier? How can you handle this to really give a view from a particular team's point of view?
It's a good question, and if I don't answer it, please raise a GitHub issue or bring this up on the Envoy workspace, the Gateway Dev channel as well. I do know for sure that you can do this using access logs. I don't know if you can do this with metrics and traces, but I know that you can do this with access logs for sure.
Cool, thank you, Arco. And I think as we talked just about traces, one of the new things in 1.1 is being able to use Zipkin for tracing, right? And
yes, you can push traces
is
to zip.
Is it simply that easy?
Yeah, just a few lines, and you can start pushing traces to Zipkin. You can also push your access logs to an access log service over gRPC, which is also what many people use today.
Cool. We are getting to a point where we only have about 7 minutes left, which this time has flown by much quicker than I ever thought it would. And thank you everyone for asking questions. So I'm going to take one more question from a pre-submitted questions, and then I'm going to take one more question that has shown up in the chat. So if you have another question, you can put it in now, and maybe you're the lucky one that I'll pick. Now, you might be the lucky one. However, we know we have questions that were submitted both ahead of time and questions in the chat. If you are following the Envoy project on LinkedIn, we'll be posting answers to questions there. You can also follow Envoy on X. We'll be posting follow-up over the next week with giving some more answers to these questions there. And if you have other questions, you can always join the Envoy Slack and join the Gateway Dev channel and ask more questions. Okay, Arco, this is the first of the last 2 questions we'll be asking for today. And that question is, how is the collaboration between Envoy Gateway or even other Gateway API implementers and Gateway API made? So Gateway API is obviously part of the Kubernetes piece, and we have implementations. How does those collaborate? And then the question continues like this. I can guess that from Gateway API maintainers' point of view, they would like to keep APIs clean by hearing various opinions from users and API implementers. While from Envoy Gateway's point of view, maybe you want the Gateway API to get an additional feature as soon as possible. How does the Gateway API community keep its balance between all the implementers?
Yeah, so I have the opportunity to sort of work on both these projects, which is Envoy Gateway as well as the Gateway API working group. In the Gateway API working group, the goal is to take what's common in all these implementations and expose it as a first-class field. It's naturally harder to sort of design an API common to all implementations, finding that's common that exists in Nginx as well as in Envoy, and design an API that's common. So this does take a little longer. This is why in Envoy Gateway, we provided extensions like backend traffic policy, client traffic policy, security policy to sort of provide features before they even exist in Gateway API to solve all the user cases.
Thank you, Arco. I am going to jump back in the questions because there was a question from earlier in our conversation that we didn't get a chance to bring in. And I don't know the answer, Arco, and I want to check if you know the answer. Well, not check for the sake of the audience, because clearly someone wants to know. We know we talked about Envoy Gateway, we talked about Contour, we talked about Nginx, but on YouTube, about 12:30 Eastern Time, Mehdi asked, but how about traffic? How does it compare? Because at that point we were in that conversation, like how did these different solutions compare? I have personally never used traffic. So Arco, do you have any experience there to share in compare and contrast with Envoy Gateway and Envoy Proxy?
Yeah, I've used traffic back in the day. I used to use it with Docker Swarm. Yeah. And traffic is another ingress controller like Envoy Gateway. I believe it has its own custom control plane and its own custom data plane as well.
Cool, thank you, Arco. I am going to ask you the very last roundup question. And that's a question from me. But I'm asking it on behalf of anyone who is here watching, because the question is this. Arco, how did you get involved in this space, in the Envoy Gateway project, and how can other people get involved in the Envoy and Envoy Gateway project? Yeah, so why did you get involved? How come? And how can other people get involved?
Yeah, so in my previous roles, I have been a developer building ingress controllers based on different data planes. I worked on Nginx, Proxy, and Envoy. I've also been an application developer who's been building all these servers, and I've had to deal with managing and figuring out how to allow traffic coming in to the cluster into my apps. So yeah, I've been fortunate to get this opportunity in my day job to work on Envoy Gateway full time and sort of just leverage all this past experience.
That's pretty exciting, actually. This is not your hobby. This is not what you do just in the evenings. You are actually getting the opportunity as part of your job to contribute and be part of this community. And that was our last question. I'm so thankful for everyone who has been posting questions. As I said, we'll try to get through and also share some of them in writing on our social media accounts related to Envoy. And I know that probably everyone actually wanted to ask what Arco's favorite color is. I have asked it before because obviously that's an important question. And that question is, the answer to that question is blue. Arco, is it CNCF blue or is it another shade of blue?
That's a complicated question. I need to look at the hex, all digits of CNCF and get back to you soon.
Yeah. Okay, great. Like that's clearly one of the most important things to know. But as we are rounding up, CNCF blue is a beautiful shade of blue. It's even got two blue colors in its logo. Just getting all of those blue bases in. And with that, I am handing back to our CNCF host, Whitney, who will close out this live webinar. Thank you so much, Whitney, for having us here and letting us geek out and talk about Envoy Gateway 1.1.
Are you kidding me? I should be me thanking you for such an amazing session. It's really enjoyable to have a conversational session as opposed to when we're hearing a presentation. And so I thank you for your excellent engagement and just being awesome generally. So thanks. And you know what else? I also want to thank everyone in the chat for joining today's episode of Cloud Native Live. It was great to have Arco and Erica here with us, teaching us about Envoy Gateway 1.1. I also loved the interaction and the many questions from chats. Thank you, thank you, thank you. So here at Cloud Native Live, we bring you the latest Cloud Native code on Tuesdays, sometimes Tuesdays, let's be honest, mostly Wednesdays at noon US Eastern. So thanks for watching us today, and thanks to those who watched the recording, and we'll see you again soon. Please come back.